Hi, Jameson Mitchell here, and in this video I'm kicking off a new Grand Tableau series. This time we're looking to see if love is in the cards, so stay tuned. So I thought before we get right into the cards that I would offer a little bit of background. So this video series is coming right off the heels of my previous Grand Tableau series based on my friend Howard and his self-employment venture. And as a result of that, I got some response from viewers as a request to do some readings based on love, relationship style situations, because it was pointed out that I tend to read from a lot of business or career situations or standpoints, and I have to say that's a personal preference of mine. But I also want to honor the requests of viewers and subscribers as they come in. So in this video series, I had another friend. Her name is Kathy. She had recently come to me. She had seen the first series, so that was a help. She had seen the first series, and she was so interested in having a Lenormand reading done on her situation. So previously I've read tarot for Kathy, but in this particular contest she was very excited about having a Lenormand reading done. So her situation is this. Kathy is married to Dave, and Kathy and Dave are experiencing a rough patch in their marriage, and so she wanted to know what the cards had to say about the next steps she needed to take moving forward. So I'm going to leave it there because a lot of her situation will be revealed over the course of the series, and so I'm going to do it just like I did Howard's Grand Tableau. So in this initial video, I'm just going to be sharing my impressions that came to my mind when I first laid down the cards in the moment, and then in subsequent videos we'll be looking at each step of my Grand Tableau process. So having said that, let's get to the initial impressions of Kathy's Grand Tableau. And here we are with the cards on the table. This is Kathy's Grand Tableau already laid out, and so I will mention first that the deck that I'm using for this video series is the Dondorf Lenormand. And so when I work with a Grand Tableau, the first thing that I do is I look to see where the significator of the person I'm doing the reading with, where that card lies. And so here we have Kathy in the second row. And for those people who like to look at the houses, we will do that in this series just as I did in the previous series. And in this particular case, Kathy's card, the lady, is in the house of the child. And so in that space, because this is how I read the houses, I always say that the card is occupying that space. So in the space that Kathy's in the reading, it's about a beginning, it's about starting something. You know, in this case, it could be like starting out, or in this particular case, starting over. Like she's faced with some new chapter in her life, a new beginning, that kind of energy. And it falls right in line with the question that she wanted to know what her next step is, or what the future was going to hold in light of this separation from her husband, Dave. So that's the first thing. And then I immediately noticed that Dave's card, the gentleman, was right next to her. So it just shows the idea here about the relationship. So yes, even though they're going through this separation, it's relatively recent because their cards are so close. But it also says too that two things. With Kathy's card looking at Dave's card, it represents like she still has her sights set on having a future with him because she's looking at him. And it also reinforces the idea here that Dave has left Kathy because the gentleman is not facing the lady card. So the challenge with this particular deck is that both significators are facing the same direction. So when you're doing a relationship reading and you're using this kind of deck where both significators are facing the same way, they will never be face to face. So, but in this particular case, there are no accidents when I use this deck. in this particular case, that serves to reinforce the situation. So it just reinforces that, yes, Dave has put Kathy in his past recently because her card is right behind him. But it also says, too, for her, even though she asked a question about starting over, what the next step is, she still has her sights set on having him in the future. And then that's further reinforced by the fact that we have the ring here, just one card over. So looking at this a little more deeply, I noticed that the gentleman card is in the house of the fox. So the fox in this context can represent a couple of things. First, it would reinforce the idea that Dave left her, and he left her for the idea that the space that he's occupying, that's the house, is that he wanted his independence, because I tend to look at fox as an independent type of card. The other thing about it is that Dave is also self-employed, and so the fox is a self-employment card for me. The last thing, and this is more in line with Kathy, and with Dave in front of her, is that she's seeing what Dave is doing in terms of leaving her as he's making a mistake, that he's wrong for doing that. That kind of energy. So, and when I put that to her, she did agree with that. She did say that what she's seeing him doing is that he's making a big mistake. And so, but it also says too, with the ring one card over, is that not only has she have her sights still on Dave, but also on their marriage. So that was very interesting to see. Then I also noticed that the card above her, I tend to look at the card above the significator as what's on this person's mind. So in this particular case, Scythe is a card that can represent a split, a disconnection, a break, something being severed. And with that, it's painful, and it's hurt, it's hurt, pain, that kind of energy. And so I said that to her. That's very interesting. Like, your mind is occupied with this break, separation, split, which is understandable. And the other thing I asked her too is, like, did she see it coming? Because the scythe can represent something unexpected, something sudden, something that happens swiftly or fast. And she did acknowledge that, she kind of felt like she was blindsided because he just came up to her and said, I need to leave, kind of energy. And she didn't see that coming. So that reinforces that. Now, the scythe is in the house of the tree. So in light of her question, it would be saying that there needs to be some mental energy put on not just looking at the separation, the split, the break, the disconnection, not just thinking about it, but also thinking about how she could heal from that or start the healing process, because tree is all about healing. And it's also about a situation that is going to take time, because trees take a long time to grow. So it's a she could grow from this, but it would take some time, but she needs to start focusing on healing from that. So then the other thing that jumped out at me was I went up and then I looked down, and so the immediate cards that were below her, and by the way, this is all in the column of what's her present. So in that regard, I looked at Stork and Cross, and they immediately formed a pair, saying that, she's going through a process of change that she's finding very difficult, again, which makes total sense. And also, too, the idea of moving on from that situation is also going to be difficult. So I noticed that. And then I also noticed that the tree, since I had mentioned the tree up here, that the tree was right behind her. And so again, the tree being right behind Kathy's card could say too, like, healing the past. That's the kind of energy that I saw about that. And then I also noticed that it was in the house of the birds. And so I offered to her that it may be helpful that if she thought about talking to someone, because the birds, of course, is a card of communication and conversation. And she said that she was seeing a therapist, which was great. And also, too, the house of the birds is about partnership, so it's about healing from that relationship. And it's very interesting that, again, her card being right next to that house is like, this is the house of the relationship. this is the house of something new, and she's moved from this house to this house, if you kind of look at it figuratively, excuse me, that way. And then I noticed that the clouds was knighting her, and knighting is a process where you can go up 1 and over 2. So the clouds is connected to her. So I said to her, this again falls in line with the question about moving on. And I would say too that there is a space of not being sure, not being certain, being confused. When you knight them, they would say that the woman is confused, the woman is uncertain, the woman is unsure, the woman has doubt. And that would make sense. And I even offered, because she's seeing a therapist, if there's a possibility that the therapist could help her, maybe if she's experiencing depression, and she did say that did make sense for her. So there was that. And with the fox card next to the clouds, for me, I saw that as being unsure, uncertain, or having uncertainty about how to survive, because in this context, fox is a card of survival for me. So, and she did acknowledge that. She, you know, it falls in line with the question about how do I go on. You know, it's about how do I move on from this challenging time. So those cards fell in line with that. And so then the next thing I did was I looked for birds. Birds is a card of, like I said, it's a card of partnership, and the birds is right here. And the reason why I say that is because there are 2 birds on the card, so for me that represents a partnership. So I look for that when we're talking about a relationship with another person. And here, very interestingly enough, birds is in the house of the gentleman, so that would be Dave's house. And so seeing that kind of reinforces the idea that Dave is, and according to Kathy, since this is her tableau, according to Kathy, he's a source of frustration for her, because the birds in this context can be not just about the relationship itself, but the frustration that goes along with that. And it also, too, can reinforce the idea here, if you take a moment to look at the cross, that they're having a difficult relationship, or they're having difficulty communicating, you know, or that they've been having difficult conversations, that kind of energy. So there's a lot of that. Now, also too, if we look at birds as the relationship itself, then of course, besides the frustration, there's a lot of anxiety. You know, when you're talking about the future and being uncertain about it, there's a lot of anxiety here. So just again, reinforcing her idea about, you know, the future looking uncertain, but she's also having a lot of anxiety about that. So, and then this card is also about sorrow. For me, from an emotional standpoint, birds can be about sorrow. And then with the cross connected to it, the cross is also about grief and suffering. So here we have sorrow, grief, and suffering all attached to the relationship energy. So I thought that was very interesting to point out to Kathy. And then I noticed that since we looked and noticed that the ring was here, and then we noticed that the birds was here, the heart is in what I call the fate line, the essence line, the destiny line. So for me, these 4 cards I don't read with the tableau. I consider them to be out of tableau. So here with the heart, it says like the love is not in the bigger picture. So it's just it's another way of visually reinforcing this idea of the split or the separation or the disconnection that Kathy and Dave are going through. And then what I did was I looked for key. Key is a card for me that is like a yes card, but it also represents the truth of the situation. So if you're ever wanting to look to see what's certain, what's true about the situation being examined, you could look to see where the key is. And the key is in the top line. And interestingly enough, it's in the house of the house. So again, the house is about comfort, but it's about home life, family life, things of that nature. So it is saying too, like, yes, this is spot on. This is what the issue is for Kathy. And so key is a card of discovering something, something being revealed. So it would say too, like she's had an important discovery or important revelation about her home life. And of course, with the scythe, with that, or connected to that, it was a sudden revelation, you know, a sudden discovery, an unexpected discovery, that kind of thing. So these cards are just wonderful in how they are just continually reflecting what the situation is. So I noticed all of that, and then I ended on this, and this was my initial thing before I went more deeply into the cards themselves, but I noticed that book is in its own house. So book for me is a card that can represent not just about secrets and mystery and learning something, because it can represent like education, knowledge, a course of study, so has all those components to it. But for me personally, as a reader, I look at book as, you know, a deck of cards, you know, doing a reading. And so it said that with book in its own house, this is going to be a significant reading just on that and that alone. So that was how I looked at the tableau initially. So I'm going to end it here, and in our next installment of this series, I'm going to do it just like I did Howard's Grand Tableau. In the next segment, we're going to be looking at the first 3 cards of the tableau. So I'm James M. Mitchell. I'm signing off. I hope you found the initial impressions from the aspect of love and relationships, because that's what I was asked to kind of look at next. So I hope you enjoyed it from that perspective, and I hope you found it insightful and helpful. And until we get together in the next installment of this series, I'm wishing you a wonderful day, and until we talk again, take care.